right.
Great. My name is Andrew Saulters, and I'm the publisher and bookmaker for Unicorn Press. I was really excited about what, the idea behind it was that when Stuart introduced me to the project in January of 2020, it was, it had all of these interesting aspects going for it, photography, a long poem, and he wanted to see if I could design a presentation that would really make all of these elements come together and pop. And I was like, yeah, I could, I'd be really glad to find out something that, I could do for this book that wouldn't just be another, like book that you turn the pages on. Well, I think that I'd wanted to do something like that since seeing Anne Carson's book, Knox. And that's a much bigger accordion book, and it's a different type of accordion book in that it's full color on every page, and it's 84 feet long when you extend it out. So I wasn't imagining that I would do something like that, but an accordion book, just something where you don't really know how much you have to look at depending on how you stretch it out. You don't have any sort of coordinated way that you have to look at it. It seemed like that type of book design, spoke to what kind of contents the book would have in it. In the earliest stages, I was thinking when we would do a vinyl pressing of Laurent's music, that it would need to be big enough to contain a 7x7, and so that was making me think like really larger format than what we actually ended up doing. But even getting it down to something more like a conventional book size. The book is 6 1/4 inches wide by 8 1/2 inches tall. Even at that size, it was still possible to do some things where the accordion book just sort of acts a little bit different than a normal book and a normal aspect ratio does. I can really only recall having been to the desert just once, but it was on a 3-day bus trip. I left San Jose, California for a 3-day bus trip by Greyhound in the summer of 2007. And of course, like, if you cross the US by bus, you're going to spend at least one day in the southeastern desert. And, just seeing the landscape change from California hills and all of that green into, those sort of like small communities that you just pass through, but there are people living there, right? And, like just gigantic dust hills and boulders. I don't know, like it seemed like that was a place that was 24 hours long for me, but I often think of it, even though that trip was over a decade ago, it seems like a place to sort of be alone and to, sort of focus on, what you need to focus on, and then it's also a place that you can leave, and re-enter into whatever it is you were trying to think about. I studied poetry on the graduate level. I studied it with Stuart as well as his colleagues at UNCG. But one could say that like my connection with poetry is that it got in my way, for the better, right? I studied as an undergraduate aerospace engineering, and I got the degree. But toward the end of my time getting that degree, I met another poet, Thomas Lux, who Stuart also knew. And it was the influence of them together that sort of indicated to me that, like, yes, you may have spent some time studying this one thing, but you didn't have to necessarily commit yourself to it as a career. And after investigating with it, experimenting with it a bit, I found that I rather much more liked just the sort of habit of mind of thinking about poetry, thinking about writing, editing, and eventually teaching, which is what I do now, far more than the habits of mind surrounding all of the math and science and physics of engineering. Well, I don't really have much experience with photography, although, when I was younger and lived in Atlanta and lived in Alabama, I really enjoyed doing street photography. I really enjoyed just going out there with a camera and seeing what I would see, because I had that prompt to look closer and see, around me, to take images. And, I would, especially in Alabama and Georgia, do this in coordination with being on a bicycle. So the habit was, you'd maybe get on a bicycle, carry a camera with you, cover maybe 30 miles in a day, and stop whenever you thought that you needed to try to take a shot, or poke your nose into some new place around a lot of these other familiar places that you had just noticed. Time passed very quickly that way, and I think about it now and I'm like, I wonder if people still find it possible to do that. If there's anybody growing up and where I grew up doing that now, maybe it was just a thing of its time. Tended to bring me closer to whatever I was passing through or by. My father is the musician of the family, and I don't know, whenever I think about creative work, I think about him. The direction that he went with his music. He writes songs, he records them, he has a number of guitars and amplification devices and pedals and recording instruments and things like that. So he does all of this work to write and record and perform, but he often doesn't want to perform on a stage, or doesn't want to give his music to a lot of people. He doesn't try to sell it or anything like that. It's always, of course, a very personal process for him, but you can tell that he always wants others to listen to it. So, when I think about Laurent's music, I'm thinking about the connection that he has, and that sort of shared musicianship between, what my father does and what I hear on Laurent's CD. This is not just experimental, it's also personal. It's it's the product of an idea that you're working through, and tomorrow you'll have another idea and you'll work through it. Musicians, they're always working. My project is that I edit and I make unicorn books by hand and I publish them, which means essentially that I make sure that they are out there for people to buy. That's, I guess, one way of defining what a publisher does. I've been doing that now 11 years, and just this past year, the founder of Unicorn Press, Alan Brilliant, died at age 86. And so, I think, it's all in your hands now, right? You've got to keep it going and then perhaps find somebody else to take it over from you when you've done what you can with it. That idea of doing what I can with it is something that I guess in some form or another I come back to repeatedly. like I was mentioning before, I am looking to find ways to do books in forms that I haven't done before. Looking to do books that require me to do new techniques, or combine different forms so that they're slightly outside of what's expected but entirely appropriate for the project at hand. Editing might be the thing that is maybe the most lasting contribution, though. The more I do this, each time I put another year on that I've been doing this, it seems that the editing is what serves the author, serves the reader best, and makes the most lasting impression. One of these days I may have to go to a point where I contract with a machine to make my books instead of making them by hand, but the editorial process will still have its result, even then. It doesn't require me to make the book to have a lasting result.